What's going on? Vincent Rapsardi, BigBlueUnbiased.com. Thank you to those who've liked, commented, and subscribed. I really appreciate you guys. Make sure to turn notifications on so every time I post you get a notification. You can come join in on the conversation because there's a lot to talk about the New York Giants. A lot of bad to talk about the New York Giants. They fell to the 49ers 36-9 on Sunday. They didn't fall, actually. They were embarrassed. Okay, they were dominated by the 49ers on Sunday. It kind of felt like a turning point game in Daniel Jones' career. It felt like a lot of people just kind of gave up on Daniel Jones and felt like this was the moment they realized he wasn't the future franchise quarterback of the New York Giants. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Daniel Jones. We'll talk about the Giants' offensive line, their defense, and the job status of general manager Dave Gettleman. So let's start with Daniel Jones. This felt like a turning point game. A lot of people gave up on Daniel Jones after this game. A lot of people said he's not the franchise quarterback for the Giants. This is not the guy that the Giants need moving forward, and I understand. I think that's definitely a legitimate assessment to make at this point, considering all of the turnovers. But for me, it's not just the turnovers. He looks lost. On Sunday, he looked genuinely lost, and I will get into some of the reasons why that may be later on in terms of the offensive line. But it doesn't look like he's comfortable in Jason Garrett's offense, and this is what happens when you don't really have an offseason because of COVID, you don't have any preseason games, and you have a new offensive coordinator. I can't really blame Jason Garrett. It's just tough for a second-year player, after performing fairly well in Pat Shurmur's offense, to take on a new offense in year two. This is why with young quarterbacks, you don't want to mess around with the offense that they play in. It's why you don't want to do it, because you never know what the result's going to be once you make the change. So when Pat Shurmur was fired, I said, I know a lot of people don't like Pat Shurmur. I wouldn't have hired him, but understand that Daniel Jones played fairly well under Pat Shurmur, and now you're going to change the offense that Daniel Jones plays in that he performed fairly well in. So I liked the hire of Jason Garrett a lot, but at the same time, for a young quarterback to learn a new offense with no preseason games and a limited offseason, it was a tough position to put him in. But at this point, I do understand those that have kind of moved on from Daniel Jones, mainly due to the turnovers. There was really nothing positive to say about Sunday's game. Intended air yards, again, very low. His yards per attempt, less than 6 yards per attempt, terrible. He entered Sunday's game 31st in intended air yards, and his aggressiveness percentage is very high, 4th highest going into Sunday's game. So he's very aggressive, tight window throws, but short passes. So the reward is very limited. All 4 of his interceptions this year have came within 10 yards or less. Okay, so a lot of short interceptions. Those interceptions are not down the field taking a risk where he could make a big play. Very risky passes with very little reward. That is an issue. So Daniel Jones, we'll see, but this was the first time I really saw a lot of people give up on Daniel Jones. So let's talk about the Giants' offensive line. On 22 dropbacks prior to the fourth quarter, Daniel Jones was pressured 12 times. So the offensive line has been terrible. The Giants' run game, their running backs averaged 1.7 yards per carry. Gallman, Lewis, and Devonta Freeman, 1.7 yards per carry. A lot of that has to do with the offensive line just being bad. Andrew Thomas, according to Pro Football Focus, he is one of the league leaders in pressures allowed, and they said that after this week he'll probably be leading the league in pressures allowed. So don't let the fact that he hasn't given up a bunch of sacks fool you. Just because you don't give up a bunch of sacks, that doesn't mean you're playing well. That needs to be understood. Some people don't understand that. On Twitter they don't. But some people don't understand that, okay? Just because a guy doesn't allow a lot of sacks, it doesn't mean that he's playing well in pass protection. I mean, let me give you an example. If an offensive tackle allowed 10 pressures, let's say over the course of 2 weeks, 10 pressures, but one of those turned into a sack. And then another offensive lineman gave up 1 pressure, but it just so happened that 1 pressure turned into a sack. Who's playing better? I would say the guy who allowed 1 pressure. So remember this with sacks. It's not that sacks don't have value, defense or offense, okay? An edge rusher who gets 10 sacks is important. That's good. That's a good year. But understand that, let's say a guy who has 5 sacks, that doesn't mean that he can't rush the passer well or he's not effective as a pass rusher. Look at his pressures. Look at his quarterback knockdowns. Look at his quarterback hits. Because there may be many plays where he just missed a sack, but he gets a pressure and he forces a bad throw. He forces an interception. And what's also good about analytics is you can add context, right? You look at the Giants' offensive line last year, they were 12th in pass block win rate. So a lot of people complained, not good enough. Actually, they've performed fairly well in pass protection. You look at this year, not only is a guy like Andrew Thomas allowing a lot of pressures, Cam Fleming not playing well either, Nick Gates, Will Hernandez, it's not an impressive unit just by the eye test and the amount of pressures or sacks allowed. But you look at their pass block win rate, entered Sunday 28th in the NFL. So overall, in basically every single category, they are not performing as an offensive line. And it's a real concern at this point. I think Matt Parrott has to start next week for the Giants at right tackle. You have to start switching things up. Because, I mean, this is just, it's getting bad. It's getting late early for the Giants offensive line. So let's move on to the defense. I thought the Giants defense actually played well in the first half. Okay, they gave up 16 points, but you think about the Jones-Engram fumble, think about the Jones interception, so they were put in a couple of tough spots, allowed 16 points. Okay, you look at the Niners, they had a 66% conversion rate, 19 more minutes of time of possession. Nick Mullens threw for over 300 yards, around 70% completion percentage, spreading the ball around. This receiver, that receiver. They entered Sunday's game with the 7th best DVOA, defense adjusted value over average, which is a Football Outsider stat. So they were a pretty good defense entering Sunday's game, but third down. They're struggling on third down. They stopped the run well against the 49ers, 2.7 yards per carry for San Francisco on Sunday, but their third down defense is bad. And I talked about last week how 5 times they had a 3-man rush on third down, and they got picked apart, 4 for 5 converting. The Bears were 75 yards and a touchdown. I will be interested to see, looking back at this game, rewatching this game against the 49ers, what they were doing on third down, and I will get back to you on that in another video. So let's finish up with Dave Gettleman. A lot of people are just done with Dave Gettleman, and understandably so. I get it. I understand that a lot of people just have had enough with Dave Gettleman. The point of this channel is to always be as objective as possible, okay, and be as fair as possible, not react to the moment and say, oh my God, everyone needs to be fired, because that's what happens a lot, right? Remember, Jerry Reese was the problem. Giants, if they fire him, that's it. They'll be great. Remember, Ben McAdoo was the problem. Giants fire him, they'll be great. Remember, Pat Shermer was the problem. They fire him, they'll be great. Offensive line, get rid of Eric Flowers, they'll be great. Get rid of Nate Solder, they'll be great, right? That's like the common trend is there's always a scapegoat, and if they get rid of that person, then all of a sudden the Giants will be great, or at least much improved. That's not always the case. And I'm not saying don't fire Dave Gettleman because other firings in the past haven't worked out, but we try and be objective here. The quarterback play has been bad. When you have a quarterback playing bad, you virtually have no shot in the NFL in terms of winning games. It's tough to win football games when your quarterback is bad, unless your defense is just off the charts good and your run game is really good. You need good quarterback play to win football games, and their quarterback play has been terrible this year. They're not going to win football games with Daniel Jones playing like this. So as much as Dave Gettleman, his team has not performed. I understand it, and if they fired him tomorrow, I would say I get it. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the quarterback play, okay? You cannot play this poorly at quarterback. It won't work, no matter who your GM is. So we will see moving forward. Daniel Jones, I don't know. I have a feeling that if Daniel Jones does not significantly improve in next week's game, that would you be surprised if the Giants benched him? I wouldn't. Because this right here, the way the Giants are performing on offense, not going to work. So that's all I got. Vincent Reps, Big Blue, Unbiased.com.